let me present this screen now to you people, please. Screen is visible now, students.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So you should remember we actually started this theory of money demand. We have been discussing a chain of these theories, and the last one we discussed in the class was the Friedman's theory. After that, in the last part of the last lecture, I started up this last theory, which I refer to as portfolio theory of money demand. Although there is no absolute end to the discussion on about this theory of money demand, but as far as the scheme I designed regarding the chain in which we need to discuss certain aspects of money demand, uh, among that chain, I am calling this particular theory as the last theory as per our course content. I'm going to reiterate some points so that the students who were not there in with me in this particular lecture, they should be able to extract all that what we have discussed regarding. And you should remember while making the theories presented, especially the Friedman theory and this Tobin's portfolio optimization theory, I compared these or the arguments or the ideas presented by these theories by taking reference or by considering the Canadian theory as a mark of reference. Remember that? ये बात याद है आप लोगों को कि मैंने फ्रीडमैन की थ्योरी को भी डिस्कस करते हुए और जो ऑप्टिमल टोबिन्स पोर्टफोलियो ऑप्टिमाइजेशन थ्योरी का स्टार्ट लिया था, तो मैंने जो फ्रेम ऑफ रेफरेंस अपना सेट किया था दैट वाज कैनेडियन थ्योरी. कैन यू रिकॉल दिस?
यस सर, वो दोनों को साथ साथ लेके चल रहे थे सर.
जी. So when I started up explaining this theory in the last week, Tobin's portfolio optimization theory, I actually gave you some points of comparison or some highlighting comparative points between the Canadian as well as this, and how this theory may deviate from the standard points defined in the Canadian theory. So
yes, sir.
I've actually summarized all those points there in the bullets here.
Yes, sir. You recall.
Yes, you can see all these bullets. These are those points of comparisons which we were making in the class. See
Yes,
that?
sir. Why measure by income? You said that permanent and transitionary income.
Yes. That was a comparison between Friedman's and Canadian theory. Now we are in the framework of Tobin's portfolio optimization theory. Now please switch off the mic, and whenever I will ask any question, then you can switch it on. Now, Canadian theory basically made a major contribution. I told you this thing that the major contribution of the Canadian theory was this one, the introduction of speculative component of money demand. And majorly, this speculative component of money demand was functionally dependent upon the expectations of people regarding the adjustments of market interest rate. In other words, these expectations were pertinent to the gravitation of interest rate around the benchmark. And you should remember, I call that benchmark, call it as a benchmark or normal level of interest rate. I also explained that coexistence of two type of money market agents is always there, bulls and bears. And we categorize these two specific type of agents based on the expectations they hold regarding what will happen to interest rate in the future. Also, I mentioned one thing, that either or relationship is a key feature in the Canadian theory. When you talk about money versus some alternate assets, so we considered either holding money or either holding the alternate assets. And as far as the Canadian theory was concerned, I told you this thing, that the corner solution was possible. When I talk about corner solution, you should remember I was telling you this thing, that if you take money and bonds as two commodities, and on the two axes there, so as per indifference curve approach or consumer choice theory approach, I told you this thing, that if this is an IC, this corner solution within the Canadian framework is possible. That means you can hold all money and zero bonds. Can you remember? I discussed this point in the class as well. I'm just reiterating all these points.
Yes, sir.
Now come to what is the underlying difference offered by this portfolio optimization theory. This theory also highlighted the role of speculative component of money demand, first of all. But the major theme addressed here, that this speculative money demand is functionally dependent upon, or it is basically explained with respect to role of uncertainty. Uncertainty about what? I introduced this uncertainties prospect, that uncertainty about the prospects of returns likely to be yielded by any alternative of money. And whenever you want to make a decision of holding any alternative of money, you always make that decision based on the returns offered by that asset. And once you focus on the prospects of returns, there's always a risk associated with that. So this suggests that the prospects of returns are complemented by the prospects of risk. This makes the future outcome a bit uncertain. So that is why your decisions of holding money versus some alternative is heavily dependent upon, or are heavily dependent upon this concept of uncertainty about the prospects of returns which are likely to be yielded by the asset. Now, I also ask you to build some frame of reference in your mind and treat risk and return as two commodities. So why I'm asking you to have this inside there, just to feel convenient about if you are in a uh, consumer choice theory, where you are well familiar with these aspects, that whenever we are in the consumer, we are taking some decisions regarding choosing consumption bundles, there's always some form of trade-off going on in our mind. If we are having two goods in our minds, and we have to make a choice of a consumption bundle, especially we are in search of the optimal consumption bundles, then there always is a likely trade-off between the two commodities, commodity one and commodity two, depending upon what form of relationship those commodities have. Those commodities can have a substitute relationship or some other form of relationship. If they have some substitute form relationship, like you can take more units of one item and you can forego the other units of the other item in the picture. But as far as this framework is concerned, I'm saying that here, if you imagine the risk and return as two commodities, and you want to establish a relationship between these two commodities, like R, and this means return. Let me add a slide here. So what I'm saying in here, that if you have two axes here in this framework, and I'm saying that treat return and risk to be two commodities, like you normally do in your micro analysis, where you had two axes, and you take a commodity x1 and x2. Normally you had an indifference curve driven over there. I'm just asking you to present a synonymous picture here, but keep in mind the relational aspect. And if you can remember, the relational aspect here is a bit different. If you treat risk and return as two commodities, here the trade-off is not similar to what we found there in the consumer choice theory. Based on the nature of these two variables we are discussing in this contextual framework. Here you can't have a negatively sloped IC. You should definitely be thinking of a positively sloped IC here, because by nature these two variables should be positively related, in that sense that if you are going for opting more of alternative assets, means if you are holding some alternative assets which is likely to yield you more returns, then it is always the complementary picture is always that this is complemented with higher risk factor as well. So if you are expecting a high return, means like this one, it's always the case that complementing it, there will be a higher risk. So as far as the shape of indifference curve is concerned, if this is risk 1 and this is risk 2 represented in this diagram, you will always have a variant scheme here. The shape of IC is not conventional. It should be positively sloped. Are you getting my point?
Yes, sir, we are getting.
Sir, we can say that they both are directly proportional.
Yes, as we concluded in the last part of the last lecture.
Okay, sir.
So move on to this. This is that particular part which we actually ended up in the class. You should remember, I refer to total return as rate of return times value of bonds. I actually sketched the framework. तो हमने ये equations लिखी थी. Total return is equal to rate of return times value of bonds. So that is R equals R times B. Total risk, rate of risk times value of bonds, second equation. And I said that if we separate out B from 2, we get this one. When replaced into 1, we got this one. So this is not a new thing to you. That is why I'm just moving superficially there. So this is that last thing which we derived there. This one. And you should remember, I labeled this R to be total return, and this is referring to total risk. And this is the ratio of the two rates. R is reflecting the rate of return on bonds, and J is reflecting the probability or rate of risk. Can you recall this?
Yes, sir, this was the
Yes,
last
sir.
point, sir, we discussed.
Yes, this is the last point we discussed.
From
That is
equation
why,
1, you can isolate.
yes,
From
what I
equation 1, we
explained,
can isolate B.
yes. What we discussed there, I said that if you assume this ratio of two rates to be constant and try to relate this total risk and total return, equation 3 states that these two are directly proportional. Assume this ratio to be constant and try to capture the relationship between this and this return. So you can clearly see that the total returns and total risk are directly proportional. That is why I'm saying that here, if you treat these two things as two commodities, conventionally you can't say that you can decrease one and increase the other. Where if you have to increase, if you have to take, or if you have to go for more returns, you have to complement it with higher risk. Means it's a complementary factor rather than a substitute factor. Getting this point? Means if you are treating these two, risk and return, as two goods, they are not serving you or not presenting an outlook of substitutes. They are presenting an outlook of complements. This point
Yes,
is
sir.
clear?
Yes, sir.
So,
Yes, sir. Clear.
now what this expression 3 is nothing but a constraint. ये वो constraint है जिसका मैं जिक्र कर रहा था. It is basically a constraint. You cannot avoid this. This directly proportional relationship between risk and return, it can't be avoided while making any form of decisions of holding any alternative of money. So if something can't be avoided and you cannot rule it out while making the decision, you always call that particular thing as a constraint.
और सर लास्ट टाइम क्लास में आपने रिस्क को भी पॉइंट आउट किया सर, कैपिटल जे को.
जी जी, वो तो मैंने किया है, लास्ट स्लाइड में वो किया हुआ है.
कैपिटल जे इज इक्वल टू स्मॉल जे ओवर स्मॉल आर इनटू कैपिटल आर.
जी, वो उसकी हाइंडसाइड पिक्चर थी. दैट वाज अ हाइंडसाइड पिक्चर ऑफ दैट. इट कैन बी इंटरप्रेटेड इन द फॉलोइंग मैनर. वो जो इंटरप्रिटेशन है मैंने ऑलरेडी कर दी हुई है.
Yes,
so
sir.
there is no need to interpret that. If you
Capital.
consider, now focus on this aspect. If you consider equation 3 to be a constraint, then you can always have an option to find its slope there. If I differentiate this equation, means taking derivative of r with respect to j, I'll get this ratio. What I'm saying to you people, that this is what you have derived there in the last slide. So if I'm taking the derivative of this with respect to this second variable j, it is simply what? This ratio. Is it? So if you think that this is a constraint, taking its derivative, once you get something, you'll say it's the slope of a constraint. Is it? Derivative क्या देता है आपको? Slope देता है ना? Slope of constraint function. Any doubt?
No, sir.
No, sir.
So that means this ratio of two rates actually is the slope of the constraint we are having. And what type of, if you take this risk and return on the two axes, if you want to have this constraint sketched there. So I've sketched this constraint with the line OA. It's a straight line. This function which we have derived there, directly proportional relationship, which is capturing the directly proportional relationship, this is linear. So I've drawn a straight line there. So if you want to focus on its slope of this straight line, this is that ratio, which I have actually expressed in this particular graph. And as I explained earlier, the nature of the two goods, risk and return, involved in the picture, the IC in this contextual scheme should be positively sloped as well. And this E is representing that point of equilibrium where you are choosing that optimal bundle, where you're having some optimal amount of return and correspondingly you are incurring some optimal amount of risk. So this Tobin's portfolio optimization theory is actually propagating that these two things can't be avoided, but you always have to have such combination of money and some alternatives of money where you should be in a position to have an optimal bundle chosen. And this optimality basically holds where your preferences represented by indifference curve are in line with the constraint you are facing. So this is the constraint and this is the indifference curve and this is the tangency of these two curves. So the point where these two are tangent normally categorizes the optimal bundle, and that is represented by E in this diagram. Why am I calling this as optimal? आप optimal किस point को कहते हो? Where there is no more possibility of any substitution left and where you cannot move to a better position than that. आप किसी भी point को optimal किसी context में तभी कहते हैं ना when you are not having any further possibilities of moving to a better position, when all possibilities of getting a better position are completely exhausted. And if you compare these 2 points P and Q, they also are on along an IC, and they are also having some interaction with the budget constraint there, means this constraint function. But we are not calling these 2 points P and Q to be optimal here. हम इनको optimal नहीं कह रहे. Why we are not calling them optimal? Because you always have a possibility of substitution taking place. You always have a possibility of moving to a better position. If you are at Q, you can always take more risk and you can always have a prospect of more returns. So you have a possibility of moving to a better position available if you are at Q. So Q is a suboptimal point. Likewise is the case for P. Likewise is the case for P. If you are at P, although it lies along this IC and it is also intersecting this constraint function, but you always have an option to incur more risk and have an option to complement it with high returns. So you always have an option to move to a better point than this P along a high indifference curve. So a better position possibility exists at both P and Q. So we may not regard P and Q to be optimal points. Students, are you getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So in this diagram, I have demonstrated that this E is the only optimal point which you can refer to in a given set of points available at your disposal. So I'm moving further now. This is all that what we have explained already, but I have added some new dimensions to that. The explanation of graph has already been made, but one more thing I have added in this case. Normally, this Tobin portfolio optimization theory characterizes individual by a very common life phenomena, and that is risk aversion. That most of the representative individuals who are there making choices regarding money and some alternative assets, they are normally risk averse. That is one aspect this theory is basically taking with it. So you should be very clear that this theory is always propagating such type of economic representatives or economic agents who are risk averse, first of all. And within this contextual scheme, if you want to qualitatively categorize the return and risk as the commodity, the return, if you treat this return as a commodity, it is a good commodity. Means in literal discussion of economics, we normally categorize goods in the commodities into good or bad prospects. Means if something is inferior and something is superior. If you consider this prospect of return and risk and want to classify these as per nature of the goods, the return is considered as something good, while risk is considered as something bad. In order to incur more risk, individual wants to be compensated with high returns. That is obvious. Means in other words, individual is only willing to take high risk if he expect to earn high return. Now I'm actually transforming you towards this prospect of, so this focus on this word now. It is not always the actual return which you are concerned with. But in Tobin's portfolio, normal convention, it is the expected return basically that counts a lot. returns are always yielded in the future. So you're not certain about the returns in the current time period. So while making your choices of whether to hold money or some alternatives, you can't be relating the two prospects directly based on the actual return. You can't have a very visible picture of actual returns available to you. So if you want to be very clear about what Tobin's portfolio theory is all about, and it is propagating about returns and trade-off relations between one commodity and the other, it is expected return that counts more rather than actual returns, because your choices basically are dependent upon money versus some alternatives, and the returns are likely to be yielded in the future. So the convention which Tobin portfolio is opting in here is expected return rather than the actual return. So expected returns plays a key role in making decisions. The likely returns, which helps you to distribute your wealth portfolio into money and some alternatives. तो उसकी भी इंटरप्रिटेशन थोड़ी सी वेरी करती है. होल्डिंग मोर बॉन्ड्स आर एक्सपेक्टेड टू यील्ड मोर रिटर्न्स. So once you try to hold more bonds in relation to money or by leaving money apart, so that is basically expected to yield more returns, but also offer a higher risk because of the prospect of capital gain or capital loss. You know that this is not a new term to you. रिस्क जो है वो किस वजह से आपको पिक्चर में आ रहा होता है?
अनसर्टेनिटी की वजह से.
अनसर्टेनिटी. अब कैपिटल गेन और लॉस होता है ना आपका बेसिकली. When you say
Yes, sir.
if you could recall, I mentioned you the equation of return. When you want to write the equation for return, basically it is having two components. One is the interest rate offered by bonds, and you should remember other term was the capital gain and loss term. This one. So when we define return, we actually defined it having two components there. One is very certain, which is the interest rate offered by bond. So if I'm talking about the return on bond, it's obvious that the first component is certainly known to us. It is a known thing. But this second component, which is the difference between the purchasing price and the sale price of the bond, means the actual current price and the price at which you have purchased. This is an uncertain term. It is a random term, which actually makes this return a bit random rather than obvious. So you always have some expectations about this return. You always expect these returns. Why you expect these returns? Because you're not sure about this thing. Students getting my point?
Means sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, जैसे हमने Keynesian framework में कहा था sir कि speculative demand for money is function of expectation.
Yes. But
So,
here it's a bit different.
Yes, sir.
Their expectations was just regarding what will be the future course of I, means nominal interest rate or the market interest rate.
Okay, sir.
Here the expectation are broadly regarding the return on some alternatives. Now see, this is that term which is referred to as capital gain and capital loss term. और ये जो ही प्राइस वेरी करती है बॉन्ड की, प्राइस वेरिएशंस ऑफ बॉन्ड्स, दे नॉर्मली मेक दिस पर्टिकुलर टर्म टू बी वेरी volatile. So what is the underlying message conveyed by this? The underlying message is you always have the actual returns deviated from the expected returns. Means you might be expecting something else, but actual in reality you'll be getting something else. तो एक बात वाज़ेह रहे, when you say actual returns and when you say expected returns, these are two different things. I'll explain this point later on as well. But your actual returns can always deviate from the expected return. And this is from where you can get the sense of the prospect of risk. So the prospect of risk is always in that dimension in this theory, that the actual return can deviate from expected return because the prices of the bonds or any alternate asset which you hold other than money, which is a risk-free asset, that can vary. Is this point clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, it's clear.
Now, I'm going to present a different version of this diagram. थोड़ा सा जो change आपको नजर आएगी वो अब एक्सेस की लेबलिंग में आएगी, क्योंकि मैंने आपको अभी जो पिछली पूरी डिस्कशन में की है वो ये में की है. इट इज basically the expected return which should be related with risk rather than the actual return. Means your decisions are based on what you are likely to have in the future rather than what you actually have. Because whenever you hold bonds, its returns are likely to be yielded in the future. तो जो y axis है basically आपका, it should be having expected returns rather than the actual returns. This is one change I have actually brought in my picture. जो पिछली पिक्चर मैंने प्रेजेंट की थी आपके सामने, वहां मैंने इसको रिटर्न से लेबल किया था. व्हाई आई लेबल्ड इट विद रिटर्न ओवर देयर, बिकॉज आई वाज एक्चुअली बिल्डिंग अ प्लेटफॉर्म फॉर यू पीपल to have an understanding of how these two variables should be related, whether they should be a positive relationship or whether they should be a negative relationship. Now, once we are able to understand that these two variables by nature should be linked positively, now I was in a better position to make you realize that what should count more, whether R or whether expected R. So as I have explained that the relation aspect should be primarily based on ER, means expected R, then I can easily substitute the expected return on vertical axis to comply to the true nature of the relationship. Now, this particular diagram is the same diagram almost we have drawn earlier. Same OA constraint faced by us, the optimal E point there, and the IC static representing the that particular indifference curve line corresponding to this optimal combination, and the IC2 and IC1 and the two suboptimal points we have. The only thing I have added up in this picture is I have added one more panel in this diagram, the lower panel. This lower panel was missing in this case. This lower panel is actually telling you something about distribution of wealth. Obviously, when you talk about risk and returns, that risk and return is yielded on certain type of asset. So what we have done in this diagram additively, I have actually added the distribution of wealth in the lower panel. So here you can see the lower panel is telling you that there is an OW line, means capturing all wealth what you have. So this is the complete wealth with you, your total money or cash you are carrying there. And you can distribute that particular wealth into money or bonds here. So I'm assuming only two assets. You can keep cash or you can keep bonds. So OW is representing what here? The maximum wealth at the disposal of representative individual. This is the maximum wealth you can have, means this is OW. And this can be distributed between money and bond holding. For example, if you talk about point E, where you are incurring this much risk and you're getting this much return, you can ask yourself a question on what factor or on what asset you will be bearing this risk. Obviously, this risk corresponds to holding of bond. So out of the total wealth, this is your bond holding. So this area is actually reflecting the bond holding. And by holding OB static value of bonds, you are incurring this much risk and you are getting this much return. And whatsoever is the leftover portion, which is B static W, this is basically what? Your money holding. Getting? Diagram clear hai?
Yes, sir.
This
Yes,
is
sir.
money holding, and this particular portion is the bond holding. So you have distributed your wealth into two components based on the expectations you have regarding the return on that, and obviously those expected returns are complemented with the prospects of the risk as well. You always have to incur some risk on holding of these type of bonds there. So this lower panel is additively mentioned in this diagram. Move on further. Now I will, ये तो आपके पास जो एनालिसिस है इस डायग्राम में, ये कौन सा एनालिसिस हो रहा है? बेसिकली दिस इज अ static analysis. All that what we have discussed in here, we are actually making a static analysis. You know that in the scheme of discussion, after making the static analysis, we always have to bring some comparative static in the picture. So ये जो है आपके पास पिक्चर में, अब सॉरी वो ऊपर मैंने लेबल किया हुआ है, need not to write it up. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to present a comparative static analysis. Means I'm going to introduce some change in the picture. And what form of change I have brought in the picture? I'm actually focusing on the slope. Now, you can see I'm focusing on this ratio. And I'm linking this ratio with what is I basically in your picture? I किसको reflect करता है? I. Students, what am I referring to? I represents what?
Sir, I represents expectations.
No, this is small I, small I.
Analyze.
Interest rate, sir.
Market
Nominal
interest
interest
rate.
rate.
Yes,
Yes.
nominal interest rate. So in this diagram, one thing is very obvious, and that is I'm actually now relating the variations of market interest rate with this framework I have already established. जो framework में Tobin portfolio optimization तरीका establish कर चुका हूँ, I'm actually relating that framework with variations in market interest rate. That if market interest rate changes, then how it will affect this framework I have already established, which is reflecting what is the risk and what is the expected return, and how you distribute your wealth portfolio and choose the optimal consumption bundle. So what is assumed in this diagram? I have actually specified three different levels of interest rates: I3, I2, and I1. The last typo hai. So what I'm assuming that suppose market interest rate is increasing. So this comparative static presented in this picture is suppose I increases. That is why I have written that I3 is greater than I2 is greater than I1. Means I3 is the highest level of market interest rate, which is greater than the second highest means I2, and which is greater than the least, which is I1. So what I'm assuming in this diagram that suppose market interest rate increases. When market interest rate increases, what is happening over here? Now I should refer back to you when I was making discussion on the nature of relationship between the various alternative assets going on in the market. When I asked you to have yourself imagine in a relative frame of reference, when I was discussing money versus alternatives like bonds, stocks, like any physical investment, bonds, मैंने क्या कहा था? What type of relationship exists between these all assets? A rivalry type relation or means a competitive relation
Yes, sir.
or some other
Competitive
form?
relation.
They all are having some rivalry. Means I told you this thing earlier that if you talk about bond and bank deposits, for example, what is the prime objective of these two as far as the role they are playing in the financial market or monetary market there? banks are aimed at raising funds, and bond issuers are also aimed at raising funds. So as per this objective of raising funds to expand their business or to generate some activity in the market, they are rivals. So whenever banks are offering higher interest rates, normally you will find that there is a co-movement as far as the interest offered by or on the newly issued bonds. I always urge you people to have this distinction very clear in your mind that existing bonds or newly issued bonds, they are entirely two different things. When you say existing bonds, the interest rate which is paid by the bonds which are already issued, it can't change. Because whenever you purchase a bond, there is a definite deed of agreement that you will get 10%, 5% till maturity. So this can't change. But when I say newly issued bonds, then keeping in mind what is the market scenario and what market competitors are offering, you can always have an option to change the interest or on bonds on the newly issued bonds. Getting my point? You can't change the existing, but you can change what is there when you are newly issuing something. Is this idea clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So when I say market interest rate is increasing, that means, for example, if I'm saying that this is the interest rate which is offered by the banks. So keeping in mind that the bond market is a rival of that, and if it is to issue new bonds, I'm not saying already issued bonds, I'm saying if it is to issue new bonds, it must offer its customer a higher interest rate as well. So what I'm saying in here, that if you are representing I to the market interest rate, and if this numerator R here is representing interest rate on bonds, for example, so as per my sketch scheme, if there is a tendency for I, means interest rate on deposits, to increase, what should be the likely response of the bond market? And do remember, I'm always be concerned about upon newly issued bonds. मैं existing की बात नहीं कर रहा, मैं इस likely response की जो बात कर रहा हूं, I'm talking about upon newly issued bonds. What will be the likely response, students?
Sir, they will increase the interest rate.
So upon newly issued
Return
bonds,
on bond will also increase.
this R, which is representing, say, the interest rate on bond, this is basically this first component. ये पहला component है, उसकी जो बात कर रहा हूं. I'm not saying this component is changing on the existing bonds. I'm saying this component is changing for newly issued bonds. So do make this distinction very clear in your mind that, so when market interest rate is increased, this RB will increase upon newly issued bonds. So what is this called? This is that co-movement I discussed earlier in the class. That there is a co-movement or tendency of co-movement upon various interest rate or found or normally observed in various interest rate prevailing in the market. So if one form of interest rate will be increasing, the other will likely to respond in same fashion. I'm not saying magnitude wise they are same. If this I would be increasing by 10, it might be possible that this will be increasing by 8 or 7. But the direction of motion, that is having a tendency of co-movement. Getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So if market interest rate is increasing, as I'm supposing over here, what do you think what will likely to happen to this slope OA? क्या होगा इस slope of constraint को? What is the slope, by the way? Slope is basically this R over J. ये synonymous है please. अगर आपको कहीं ये R नजर आ रहा है या कहीं ये R नजर आ रहा है, तो I'm using them interchangeably. There is no difference between the two. So what do you think that when R is increasing, what is happening to the slope? Nothing has happened to the denominator. J is fixed. So what is happening to the slope?
Increasing, sir.
Increasing. So what do you think in the graph? What change should be brought? When slope increases, the curve becomes steeper, or the graph becomes steeper or flatter?
It becomes flat, sir.
Steeper. Slope, please,
Oh,
students.
yes, yes.
When
No,
slope
sir.
increases,
It's
what
upward,
happens?
sir.
When slope increases, what happens normally? The graph becomes steeper or flatter?
Steeper, sir.
Sir, it shifted upward, sir.
Steep होता है या flat होता है? पहले तो इस बात का जवाब दें ना. You should be very definite about this.
Steep, sir.
Steep होता है.
Steeper, sir.
Steep.
Steep होता है means rise बढ़ जाता है ना ग्राफ का. अगर ये है तो इसकी अगर आप rise over run निकालें तो steep हो जाएगा means इसकी rise बढ़ जाएगी और run वही रहेगा. Is it like that?
Yes, sir.
So this graph is having a higher rise and this graph is having a lower rise. So based on increase in slope, your graph should become steep. So this is OA rotating to this as OA prime. And then if interest rate further increases, it rotates to this OA double prime. Idea is clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
That means based on this comparative static, so I started my channel. Tell मैंने कहाँ से start किया? I've actually brought a comparative static in the picture and I assume that market interest rate changes. So if market interest rate increases, it is likely to have some implication for the bond market. And whatsoever is happening to the bond market, I have actually reflected it in terms of the adjusting the slope of this constraint function. So this slope is getting more steep. So corresponding to three different constraint lines, you will be having three different optimal combination bundles. ये जो previous discussion हमने की थी, this E, this was just pertinent to a static analysis where we were just having one constraint line or function. But now we are having three constraint functions. So logically, corresponding to three different state of affairs, you should have three different optimal combinations. So corresponding to the state of affair, you were subject to corresponding to this budget constraint OA or the constraint OA. This is the optimal combination where you'll be bearing this much risk and you are entitled to this much returns. But if you are subject to a new state of affair based on whatsoever is changing in market in terms of the interest it is offering, you'll be adjusting yourself. Means your response and behaviors in terms of holding the optimal amounts of money versus bonds, they should be adjusted in accordance with what is offered by the market. So as market interest rate changes and correspondingly what is offered by the bond is also changing, you should be adjusting yourself by taking more risk and you are having a prospect of getting more returns. So as you have moved from, as you were in one state of affair where your prospect of getting return is lower, you had a different combination, R1 and J1. But as something has changed in the market interest rate has increased from I1 to I2, and correspondingly the interest offered by on the newly issued bond is increased from R1 to R2. You should certainly add more bonds in your wealth portfolio. So when you move from this point to this point, this is equivalent to saying that you are adding more bonds. Existing bonds to hain hi hain aapke paas. You are purchasing more bonds. So that is why I'm interested in newly issued bonds. So you are adding more bonds in the picture. And if you are adding more bonds in the picture, you are bearing more risk and you have a prospect of getting more returns. So corresponding to one state of affair, this E1 was the optimal combination, and corresponding to a new environment or change condition, this E2 is the optimal combination. So corresponding to E1, this was your bond holding, and corresponding to this E2, after this bond holding has increased to this level. Likewise, when interest rate is subject to further increase and correspondingly the interest rate offered by the newly issued bonds or on the newly issued bond further increased, you will, in a new state of affair, you'll choose a new optimal combination bundle where you'll be bearing more risk and you are likely to have more returns. So this is how we have brought the comparative static in the picture and how this is affecting the distribution of your wealth portfolio. This is how initially you are holding this bonds, secondly you are holding this bond, and thirdly even you are holding more bonds. And corresponding picture is if you keep on increasing more bonds, you are likely to decrease the money holding. So increased bond holding in the picture is basically linked with decreased money holding. So hindsight picture of increasing or making decision of holding more bonds is you are getting yourself deprived from holding money. Is this message clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So making adjustments in your portfolio always have something to say about money demand. So if you want to summarize this particular aspect, what we have discussed in this diagram, this is all that explanation I have already made. I'm not going to repeat these bullets, please. मैं ये सारी explanation पहले ही कर चुका हूँ. So you can read it by yourself. I'm just going to move on to this money demand function derivation. Look at this shape of money demand function we have derived. See, I'm referring back to the previous diagram. This diagram. If initially this was the bond holding, what this was representing? ये किसको represent कर रहा था? Leftover portion. If this greenish area, this small bracket, so this B1W represented by this line, this is representing what? Money demand or money holding?
Bond holding, sir.
No, this was the bond holding. This green area, OB1. Initially, this OB1 was a bond holding. So leftover portion was representing what? Money holding.
Money holding, yes.
When the bond holding changed from this OB1 level to this OB2 level, now this B2W, what this would be referring to? Again, money demand.
Yes, sir.
And when bond holding further increased from OB2 level to OB3 level, this one, so this leftover portion here, this smaller portion, this will be reflecting what? Money demand. Getting?
Yes,
So
sir.
all these reddish areas are indicating that corresponding to some form of bond holdings, you always can capture some money holding picture from this wealth distribution. So initially the B1W, so initial money holding was B1W. And B1W is greater than B2W. This is B2W, which is even greater than B3W. Any doubt? So your initial money holding was big enough. The second was relatively small, and third is the smallest. First lies corresponds to I1, second corresponds to I2, and third corresponds to I3. So corresponding to the I1 level of interest rate, you have the biggest amount of money holding. Corresponding to the I2 level of interest rate, you have the relatively lesser. And corresponding to the highest level of interest rate, you have the least money holding. Is it clear? As per this
Yes,
diagram.
sir.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
the negative relationship between I and money demand is very obvious from the previous discussion we have made. Corresponding to the highest level of interest rate, you have the least level of money holding. And corresponding to the least level of interest rate, you have the highest level of money holding. One thing is very obvious, that there is a negative relationship between I and MD. So this is in line with what we have discussed in the previous theories. So this is not much different. What additional contribution this theory is presenting in the picture? ये तो सारी वही बात है जो हमने पिछली थ्योरीज में भी देख ली थी कि देयर मस्ट बी अ नेगेटिव रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन इंटरेस्ट रेट एंड मनी डिमांड. नई चीज क्या नजर आई है यहाँ पे एडिशनली?
Bond holding.
एक तो वेल्थ पोर्टफोलियो का ऑप्टिमल कॉम्बिनेशन, एक तो वो प्रोपगेशन है ना, दैट इज न्यू एडिशन. और नई चीज क्या नजर आई है इस मनी डिमांड के हवाले से? एनी न्यू थिंग विच यू हैव फाउंड देयर इन दिस? स्टूडेंट्स, कोई नया आइडिया जो आपके माइंड में आ रहा हो कि कोई नई चीज ऐड की है इस थ्योरी ने पिक्चर में?
सर ये नॉन लीनियर मनी
नॉन
डिमांड.
linearity, non linearity, shape of MD. See, shape of MD, you can see here, see these gaps, see these gaps. When you had the option to have this much more returns, you were willing to bear this much more risk. But when the same option of getting more return, ये देखें ये gap same है, और vertically देखें, this gap and this gap in terms of returns, the gap is same. But this gap and this gap in terms of risk, that is not same. That means if you are having a prospect of getting same increments in terms of return, you can see that the response of the respective economic agent is different. Initially, he'll be willing to incur more risk for a given level of prospects of a return. But later on, he'll be willing to incur less risk for the same level of prospects of return. Getting this point?
Yes, sir.
Means
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
it's that psychological convention that when you are having enough cash with you and you have to forego that cash, means if you are distributing your wealth portfolio, if you have all, if initially you are having enough cash and you want to forego some amount of cash and you have to switch towards some purchases of other alternatives, then you are happy to do this. You will be more likely to do this when cash is bigger in amount with you. But when you keep on doing that in the later on stages, when you are running short of cash and you're getting more and more of bonds, at margin, the margin utility of bond holding will go down, and margin utility of cash or money, which is less with you now, this will increase. So it's logical for you to say that for initially when margin utility of money was low and margin utility of bond was high, bond holding was high, you will be happy to bear more risk for getting some more returns. But for later on stages, when the cash will be getting lesser in with you, its margin utility will be high in your mind. So you'll be willing to forego less of the cash and you'll be willing to incur less of risk for bond holdings. So naturally, if you take the psychology of human being into account and if you bring the margin utility theory in the picture, that getting more and more of bonds ultimately leads to diminishing return on bond holdings, and losing more and more of cash ultimately leads to increased margin utility of money in your eyes. So naturally the relationship between money and I, it must not be a straight line, it must be a curved relationship, a non-linear relationship. See in here, when you move from I1 to I2, your money demand decreased by this much big value. But for later on movement, your money demand has decreased by this much value. What is this indicating? Initially, you were willing to compromise or forego this much money demand because you were switching your resources towards bond holding. But later on, for the same level of increase in I, you were willing to forego this much money holding because money is becoming more valuable to you. Here, marginal utility of money has started increasing. So that is why you are foregoing less of it. Is this point clear?
Means, sir, both are not changing in same proportion.
Means you can't keep on foregoing money for bonds at the same ratio. Initially, you will behave differently. Later on, you will behave differently. Even if somebody gives you the same temptation, if this jump of I1 to I2 is 10%, and initially your response is this much, this 10% increase in I actually was linked with this R. So initially you were having a prospect of getting more return on bonds. So initially you had a temptation that a return on means interest rate on bond is increased by 10%. So you decreased money and you switch towards bonds. But if again somebody gives you this, see this gap is same. This initial a jump from I1 to I2 and this I2 to I3, this is same. If someone again give you this temptation of 10% increase, you will not be purchasing bonds in the same proportion as you have purchased in the initial stage, because your tendency to compromise money now is changing, because money is less with you and its marginal utility is more in your eyes now. Is this point clear?
Sir,
Yes,
in
sir.
case the interest rate is increasing more and more, in that case, we can see that the risk will be again low. This money holding will be again lower, sir. In that case, so we can't
Again,
say
that
that increment have
again
to be same, sir.
no, again that relationship will be non-linear. See, if you are saying that if this is I1 and this is I2, and you are saying that even if I go further, this interest rate increment is more and more. The first increase, and you are saying that the second increase is not same. And if you're saying that money demand responses are same, so again, do you think that this relation is linear? Linear is
No, sir. This is not
linear
linear.
is always when you say that equiproportionate change in one variable brings equiproportionate change in the other variable, which is not the case observed over here.
Yes, sir. Sir, in the point, sir, we mentioned that a same increment in I will lead to less money holding. But if we
Variable
say, yeah,
variable increments in bold
more,
holding.
yes, sir, if we say more increment in I still leads to less money holding. Again, in that case,
That can only be possible if marginality of money is constant. Is it natural to say this thing, that marginality of money remains constant?
no, sir.
So,
You
sir,
know, you all
how he
people
will
know,
survive?
you all people know that we are economic theory propagates law of diminishing marginal returns. If you keep on getting more of one thing, its return ultimately would diminish. We are
Yes, sir.
also, we as economic beings are also subject to law of diminishing marginal utility. If you keep on getting more and more of one item, its marginal utility ultimately diminishes. What you are saying is keep on getting more and more, and still you are having same level of satisfaction. That means you are assuming that marginal utility is constant. That is not the case. Marginal utility must diminish if you're getting more and more of something, and it must increase if you are losing more and more of something. Point clear?
Yes, sir. Sir, a point is clear, sir. But if someone is having more wealth, sir, in that case, the second,
That is a please. That is a shift factor. That is a shift factor. If you change wealth, it will be a shift factor of money demand. Here we are distributing wealth between M and B for a defined level of wealth. Wealth is
okay,
constant, and we are distributing it within bond and money. If you change wealth, it will shift money demand. It will not be a movement along the curve.
okay, sir, clear.
Getting? ये जो पॉइंट इन्होंने रेज किया है वो आपको क्लियर है? बाकी स्टूडेंट्स को भी he was asking about if wealth changes what will happen. So I'm
So,
saying
sir,
that
that is a inferior good, sir. It's not normal.
he's saying that if wealth changes what will happen to this framework. I'm saying that if wealth changes, if you want to highlight that if wealth changes what happens to this framework, Abdul Kahar, you have raised this question, na? You actually put this
Yes, sir.
question. If wealth changes, then what happens to this framework? So I'm asking his question that if this is a derived money demand function for a defined level of wealth, I'm saying it is for a defined level of wealth, for a given level of wealth.
Suppose, sir, if this given level of wealth is higher, but at first
Yes,
time you
yes.
purchase lease bonds, sir. For
For a
example, you
defined,
still have more money in your pocket, but the second time purchasing will not affect that much, sir. Again, your marginal utility will not decrease for the second time.
for
So,
a
sir, how we
defined
can say that money
level,
holding will decrease, sir, for any same increment for a defined level of wealth,
that
sir?
that feature is specific to movement along the curve. That feature is not always specific to the shifts. That is always valid for movement along the curve, not for the shifts. For a defined level of wealth, if I would say wealth increases, if I would say wealth increases, what will happen? Money demand will shift. And if I would say wealth decreases, money demand will shift down. Now, Abdul Kahar, just to answer your point, what type of shifts I have captured here?
Yes, sir.
Parallel up, parallel up, and parallel down, where the shape of the newly shifted money demand function is same. What you are saying to me is regarding preference when the wealth is changing. Is it like that?
Yes, sir.
So, in that particular aspect, if you want to capture the same thing which I am quoting in here, if this is the original money demand function, here I assume that wealth is increasing, here I assume that wealth is decreasing. And this is causing the preference of the individual to present an outlook like this. But if you are saying that the preference initial level of wealth regarding money demand and preference at later on stages of wealth is changing and not same, so the shift will still occur like MD prime, but the curvature will change. Here, if wealth will be increasing, the money demand function although will shift outward, but its curvature will not be same.
Sir, if the curvature is toward down, so finally the two curve will intersect, sir.
No, 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 not at all. That is a ruled out possibility. We can't be in that region. In two particular aspects, two indifferent curves can't intersect. There's no
Yes, sir.
possibility of intersection.
This is the point that it is not intersecting. But if this curvature is toward downward and the
No,
below
no,
one
no.
is,
We always lie in that region where there's an asymptotic type of curvature. You always say that for any higher level of any point beyond this almost become say vertical, and for any point beyond this almost become vertical. So there is no margin option where these two can intersect. They will start moving parallelly later on. This area of interest we are interested in, we are talking about this change in curvature corresponding to this area. Later on, corresponding to the endpoint axis, they appear to be moving in tandem or parallel.
clear, sir.
All the rest of the students, if wealth will increase, it shifts the money demand up or down. If the preference or regarding money and bond remains same, then the graph will shift in parallel manner. Curvature remains intact as the original curvature. But if at the low level of wealth and high level of wealth, the mind frame of the individual gets changed and his preference to substitute money with bond changes, then you can have you can experience a changed curvature. Although the money demand will shift, but the curvature of the graph will change in response to change in wealth. Got this point?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Should I move further?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Some mathematical representation, जो अपनी graphical देखा है उसको थोड़ा सा mathematically भी represent कर लेते हैं, just to have an insight about this. एक चीज जो मैं पहले ही बता चुका हूं वो मैंने यहाँ पे दोबारा रीइटरेट की है. अ क्रिटिकल एस्पेक्ट टू बी फोकस इन द एक्सप्लेन थ्योरीज, ये डिस्टिंक्शन आपके माइंड में बहुत क्लियर होनी चाहिए, दैट व्हाट इज एक्चुअल एंड व्हाट इज एक्सपेक्टेड. ये क्यों क्लियर होनी चाहिए ये मैंने आगे एक्सप्लेन किया. इफ वी रिकॉल वी स्पेसिफाइड द रिटर्न ऑन बॉन्ड्स हैविंग टू कंपोनेंट्स. ये वही इक्वेशन है जो मैंने थोड़ी देर पहले आपके सामने लिखी थी. द रिटर्न ऑन बॉन्ड equals the interest rate plus capital gain or loss. Any doubt? We have discussed this term many times. The return on bond equals the interest rate on bond plus the difference or the price fluctuations or the difference which is created in the price of bond over time. So this term is the capital gain or loss term. यही रिटर्न की डेफिनेशन होती है ना.
Yes, sir.
इसको लेबल कर रहा हूं सिंपली. आई कीप द फर्स्ट टर्म सेम एंड दिस बिगर टर्म आई लेबल इट विद जी. ये सिर्फ लेबलिंग की है. जी इज लेबल फॉर द सेकंड टर्म, नथिंग एल्स. द फर्स्ट टर्म रिप्रेजेंट्स व्हाट? इंटरेस्ट रेट ऑन बॉन्ड, while the second term represents what? Capital gain or loss term. This formula, इस फॉर्मूला से आपने क्या एक्सट्रैक्ट किया था? अभी थोड़ी देर पहले भी मैंने इसी के ऊपर डिस्कशन की है. द फर्स्ट टर्म इज सर्टेन. पहली टर्म सर्टेन है because once you purchase a bond and you make an agreement of lending something to somebody, बॉन्ड खरीदने का क्या मतलब है? You are lending somebody, is it? जो
Yes,
बंदा
sir.
आपको बॉन्ड सेल कर रहा होता है आप उसे लोन दे रहे होते हैं ना.
यस सर, डेट इंस्ट्रूमेंट है सर ये.
Debt instrument है. So while purchasing a bond, you are dead sure about that what interest rate you will be getting till maturity. So this first term is known. ये जो पहली टर्म है ये known term है. Statistics पढ़ी भी है ना आप लोगों ने?
Yes, sir.
यस सर.
Statistics के कितने कोर्स पढ़े हैं?
2 courses, sir.
Statistics में expectations के rules भी पढ़े होंगे. The rules of expected value.
Yes,
चल
sir.
खामोशी छा. जब कोई
आप
चीज
खामोशी
काम
हो गई.
खामोशी आ जाएगी. Everybody would get mute and silent once anything is asked regarding what you have already studied. कभी नहीं निकाला ये?
Sir, we studied this one. Expected rule, yes, sir.
यस सर, ये पढ़ा हुआ है.
जहां पे आप उसको मीन वैल्यू भी कहते थे.
Yes, sir.
एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू ऑफ एक्स. तो इसके आपने एक्सपेक्टेशंस के रूल भी
Yes,
पढ़े
sir.
होंगे.
Geometrics में भी पढ़ा है सर.
इसके
Residual का
रूल
mean zero equal.
you will be or you must be having some insight about the rules of these expected values as well. Expectation of a constant is constant. Expectation of a random variable is what? Expectation of a natural variable is what? And things like that. Product rule, ratio rules, and so many other things apart. यानी अब खामोशी है. अब बिल्कुल खामोशी है. कि एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ अ कांस्टेंट का आंसर क्या आएगा? एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ अ वेरिएबल का आंसर क्या आएगा?
सर कांस्टेंट का तो 0 है.
एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ अगर आपके पास प्रोडक्ट ऑफ वेरिएबल्स हो तो क्या आएगा? प्रोडक्ट ऑफ वेरिएबल्स. तो ये सारे रूल्स थे ना कि नहीं थे? यानी इफ यू टेक अ कांस्टेंट, एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ अ कांस्टेंट इज कांस्टेंट इटसेल्फ. expectation of a variable is actually the same, but if variable is random, लेकिन अगर वेरिएबल रैंडम हो जाए तो क्या होता है? If variable is random, then expected value of that x comes out to be what? 0. खामोशी, फुल खामोशी. दो स्टैट्स के कोर्स पढ़ लिए एंड यू आर स्टिल म्यूट एंड साइलेंट एंड जस्ट प्रेजेंटिंग दिस टू मी दैट यू आर अनफेमिलियर विद ऑल दैट आई एम एक्सप्लेनिंग हियर. Students, are you there with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
In which world you are lying now?
Expectation of random variable, sir. Arithmetic means, sir.
Look,
सर
Why
शर्म से
not?
पानी है सर.
क्या हुआ है?
तो मैं कह रहा हूँ सर सर हमारे शर्म से झुके हुए हैं सर. पानी पानी है.
देख लें, आप लोग अपनी डिग्रीज कंप्लीट करने जा रहे हैं एंड स्टिल दिस इज द स्टेट ऑफ अफेयर विद यू पीपल.
Sir, we will try to go through
सर
this,
थोड़ा
sir.
बहुत याद है सर. थोड़ा बहुत है इसका.
जी, अब मुझे ये बताएं, मैं आपको ये कह रहा हूं कि एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू अगर एक कांस्टेंट हो तो उसकी एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू होती है कांस्टेंट. पहले तो ये बताएं कि एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू का फॉर्मूला क्या होता है. इट इज कैप्चरिंग बेसिक द मीन. So once you try to capture that, it is basically summation x and there are certain complementary factor of probability of x. Is it like that? Summation x means it is basically the summation of these two variables, x times probability of x. That what is the basically probable outcomes of how many times or how frequently that outcome occurs. Is it like that? ये P of x क्या थी बेसिकली? ये probability of occurrence of that event होती है ना?
Yes sir.
Probability of x क्या होता है? Probability of occurrence of that event.
Yes, sir.
तो बेसिकली आप समेशन करके निकालते हो ना, जब आप x के वैल्यूज होती हैं आपके पास, x is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3 और यहाँ पे उसकी आउटकम प्रोबेबिलिटीज होती हैं कि what is the probability that of outcome of this 0. तो आप यहाँ पे उसकी मुख्तलिफ प्रोबेबिलिटीज लिख रहे होते हैं. 0.1 से 0.2 से 0.5 से 0.05 whatsoever is the case. तो यहां आप इन दोनों को मल्टीप्लाई करते थे. मल्टीप्लाई करके आपके पास रिस्पॉन्स आता था और उस रिस्पॉन्स से आप निकाल लेते थे उसका सम, मींस इस पूरे का सम, जिसे आप कहते थे समेशन एक्स पी ऑफ एक्स. इज इट लाइक दैट?
Yes, sir.
याद आया?
बिल्कुल sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
आप सबको याद आ गया. नाउ अब कहने का मकसद ये है कि बेसिकली ये चीज जो है, this one, this is that which I'm putting into question, that what is this x? Now the question is, if this x is constant, its mean value remain constant. Is it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If this x is constant, the answer comes out to be constant itself. अगर ये कांस्टेंट है, कांस्टेंट होने का क्या मतलब है? इफ दिस वैल्यू 0 0 0 0, प्रोबेबिलिटी भी कांस्टेंट चल रही है, तो उसकी मीन वैल्यू में क्या डिफरेंस क्रिएट होगा? नथिंग. सो एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू ऑफ अ कांस्टेंट इज कांस्टेंट इटसेल्फ. अब दूसरा प्रोस्पेक्ट जो मैं आपसे अभी मैंने जिक्र किया, मैंने कहा कि आप कहते हो एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू ऑफ अ वेरिएबल. और अब इस वेरिएबल की नेचर है, मैंने कहा इफ इट इज रैंडम. रैंडम से क्या मुराद है? Not having a definite course of action. For example, if I write a variable in front of you like -1, -2, 0, +1, +2, -1, +1 and so on. तो ये एक मैंने वेरिएबल के मुख्तलिफ पैटर्न्स आपको बता दिए. Just look into the pattern of these variables, this variable. Do you think there is any systematic pattern? कोई systematic pattern है इन वैल्यूज में?
No, sir.
नो
ये क्या
सर.
है? क्या नजर आ रहा है? ये वेरिएबल के जो पैटर्न है वो
Randomness.
रैंडम है.
Sir, random है.
रैंडम से मुराद ये समटाइम्स पॉजिटिव, समटाइम्स जीरो, समटाइम्स नेगेटिव. गेटिंग? यही नजर आ रहा है ना यहाँ से?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
आप जरा मेरे इस पॉइंट पे आए. मैंने इस टर्म के बारे में आपसे क्या कहा है? दिस टर्म, कैपिटल गेन और लॉस टर्म. Do you think it's a variable represented by G and it is sometime positive, sometime zero, sometime negative? ऐसी बात ही है ना? Sometimes actual price can be greater than the price at which you have purchased. Sometimes the current price can be less than the price at which you have purchased. Sometimes they both can be equal. So sometimes the capital gain will be there, sometimes capital loss will be there, and sometimes a state of indifference, no capital, no gain, no loss. ये पॉइंट क्लियर हो रहा है?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It means this is again random and the value could be
Yes,
zero.
sir.
That means
Expected
this
value could
second
be
term,
zero.
this means this second particular term is a pure random variable. ये किसी का माइक बहुत ज्यादा साउंड कर रहा है, प्लीज क्लोज करें उसे. This second term is a pure random variable. So as I'm going to take the expectations of that, expected value of this, that is
Sir.
why I'm asking you people to realize that you should have this understanding
Sir.
of what. Yes.
रैंडम का हम सर अनएक्सपेक्टेड कह सकते हैं सर. जो श्योर ना हो, जो भी आ सकते हैं सर.
Having no definite pattern.
ओके सर.
You can't predict it. No systematic order. You can define it in these ways. Got it?
यस सर. ओके.
Yes, sir. Got it.
अब मुझे बताएं, अगर इसका सम करेंगे तो क्या होगा? ये जो मैंने अब लिए रैंडम वैल्यूज, if I want to have a sum of this, just to an idea about, leave apart, ये सेकंड पार्ट को छोड़ दें, सिर्फ इसका सम करके मुझे बताएं कि इस सम से क्या नजर आएगा आपको?
Zero, sir. It's zero.
मीन्स अगर आप इसकी मीन वैल्यू की तरफ जाएंगे तो इट इज हाईली लाइकली दैट यू विल बी गेटिंग अ मीन वैल्यू विच कैन टेंड टू जीरो. तो ऐसी रैंडम वेरिएबल्स, अगर वेरिएबल्स का पैटर्न रैंडम हो तो इट इज हाईली लाइकली दैट यू शुड बी एबल टू हैव सच पॉइंट of time where you can get their mean value to be zero. Getting this point?
Yes, sir.
That means कि अगर आपके पास वेरिएबल रैंडम है तो इट्स एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू शुड बी ट्रीटेड एज जीरो. ये आपने स्टैटिस्टिक्स में भी पढ़ा होगा और आपने इकोनोमेट्रिक्स में भी पढ़ा होगा. अ प्योर रैंडम वेरिएबल. So I have actually explained in front of you that how this mean value can be zero based on the randomness or the random nature of that variable. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Got it, sir.
So now come to this point I was explaining. So this was an equation which was an equation of actual returns, or simply I label it with R plus G. So this is actual return. The first term मैंने explain कर दी. the formula suggests that due to fluctuation in price of bonds, over time there is always an aspect of risk associated with the holding of bonds. When it comes to calculate the expected return, अब मैं आपके सामने जो है मैंने calculate किया expected returns like this. When you want to calculate the expected return, you have to apply the expectations on both terms. This is that value R, and this is that R, and this is that G. You know that अब आपके पास एक बात clear है. This is a known term. You know that what is this term? Known का क्या मतलब होता है? It is a constant term. Till maturity, this can't change. Till maturity, this can't change. Once you make an agreement with any bond seller, till maturity, this term can't change. But this term is what? Random.
This is random, sir.
This is a random variable. Any doubt in this? So the status of the
No,
two
sir.
variables, the status of the two variables defining R, that is different. The first term is known, and you may call it as a known. Constant. It can't change once you make an agreement. अब मैं आपसे कहता हूं apply expectations on both sides. E of R equals E of small r plus E of G. Got it?
Yes, sir.
This is now my expected returns. This was equation of actual return, and this is my expected return. What is R? A known constant. And just a while before I told you this thing that expectation of a constant is constant itself. And expectation of a random variable is
0.
0. So your expected return equals this R. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So mathematically, I have written or proven this thing here, that expected return equals R, and this R is what? Prevailing or currently existing interest rate on bonds. That is why in our graphical disposition, we have related R to the variations in market interest rate, as we have judged in many occasions before that. Various interest rate in the market has a tendency to co-move. Therefore, when I increases, R on newly issued bonds are likely to increase, and thus this will increase. Convincing people to hold a bigger proportion of bond in their wealth portfolio. इसीलिए हमने अपनी पिक्चर में R को expected R के साथ लिंक किया है. जो हमने rotations की थी, ये इसी basis पे की थी. When I changes, R gets changed, and when R gets changed, there is a prospect of different expected returns, and then the portfolio combination representing money holding and bond holding will get changed. Point is clear?
Yes, sir.
Move on further.
Yes, sir.
But the point is, due to the presence of capital gain or loss term, actual returns can vary from expected returns. So when you say the actual return can vary from expected returns, they can be different. So that means you are reflecting a deviation. You're talking about a deviation. And this deviation represents what? It represents what? Prospect of what?
Risk,
sir.
sir.
Yes. This is representing prospect of risk. So prospect of risk is always there. Once you focus on this point that the actual return can differ from expected returns. अब आप इस मॉडल में जरा इनफॉर्मली फॉर्मली आ जाएं. लेट अस डिनोट टोटल वेल्थ. अब्दुल कहार ये वही पॉइंट है. टोटल वेल्थ कैन बी डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड बिटवीन मनी एंड बॉन्ड. इसको हमने कांस्टेंट रखा है टोटल वेल्थ को. It can be distributed between money and bond, where M represents cash and B represents bond, dividing both sides by W. अगर दोनों sides को W से divide कर दूं, तो what you'll people be able to get? W by W, M by W, B by W. So this will become 1. तो ये हो गया 1. I have labeled this M by W with this alpha and B by W with this beta. So what is this reflecting now? Alpha represents share of cash in wealth portfolio, and beta this beta reflects what? Share of bonds holding in wealth portfolio. So this is your expression 1 static. Alpha plus beta equals 1. So this is my starting point. The actual yield or return on portfolio. अब जो आपका wealth portfolio है उस पे अगर मैं return की इक्वेशन लिखना चाहूं तो I can generally write it in what way? अब portfolio पे return money की वजह से आ रहा है या bond की वजह से आ रहा है?
bonds की वजह.
अब मैं लिख क्या रहा हूं? What I'm writing here? Actual yield or return on portfolio. So my wealth portfolio comprised of 2 assets. But having an understanding on the nature of the 2 assets, I know that if I want to calculate the return on portfolio, this return is not attributed to money. This return is attributed to what? Bond. So beta, which reflects what? Beta किसको reflect कर रहा था?
Share of bond in wealth.
Share of bonds.
So beta times R plus G. So beta is the fraction of bond you are holding in your wealth portfolio, and this R plus G is that return, which I have already mentioned in the previous slide, this equation. This one, R plus G. So beta times what is the return you are actually getting on. So means if you are having 50% of the bonds, then the return on portfolio is 0.5 on the return on bonds. This is that what is written there in the above equation. That if you want to calculate the return on portfolio, the portfolio is comprised of money and bonds, but you should keep this thing in your mind that your whole portfolio is not return yielding. Whatsoever money you will hold in that portfolio, that is return free asset, means it is not giving you any return, physical return. So if you want to calculate return on portfolio, it will be just be based on fraction of bond holding in the portfolio times the return which the bond is giving you. This is your expression 2. Here beta lies between 0 and 1. That is obvious. ये 0 और 1 के दरमियान क्यों lie कर रहा है? आपको याद होगा, while I'll make a start to this theory, I said that corner solution is not possible. You cannot hold complete bonds and you cannot hold complete money. You should be in between. Point is clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Move on. If we take expected value of 2, means this one, this equation, like we took earlier, it would be simply be, आपको पता है expectation के rules में एक और rule भी है. If you take expectation of 2 variables who are, which are multiplying with each other, you can write it separately. Like this. Can we?
Yes, sir.
So if there were 2 variables involved in the picture, one is beta and one is R plus G. If I apply the expectation on that, it will be expected value of beta and expected value of the second term. Do you know beta is constant? Beta is fraction of bond in the wealth portfolio. That is known or unknown? Students?
Sir, known, sir.
Known है ना?
Yes, sir.
So expected value of beta should be beta itself. What about these two? R is known or unknown?
Known, sir.
So expected value of R is R itself. What is G? Random variable. Expected value
Yes,
of
sir.
G is.
This
Zero.
is 0.
So this is my third equation. Expected return equals beta times R. Now I'm going to calculate the expression for risk attached with the portfolio. रिस्क को मैंने किस चीज से रिप्रेजेंट करवाया था? डिविएशन. स्टैटिस्टिक्स में डिविएशन को आप जिस कॉन्सेप्ट से कैप्चर करते हैं, x माइनस एक्सपेक्टेड वैल्यू ऑफ x. ये जो कॉन्सेप्ट होता है ये किसकी तरफ लेके जाता है आपको? ये कौन सा कॉन्सेप्ट है? डिविएशन ऑफ एक्चुअल फ्रॉम द मीन वैल्यू. स्टैंडर्ड डिविएशन होता है ना?
Yes, sir.
स्टैंडर्ड डिविएशन. और उसको लेबल किससे करते हैं नॉर्मली हम?
Sigma.
So risk attached to the portfolio is measured by standard deviation of the return of portfolio as that risk. चूंकि वो सारा का सारा रिस्क मेनली किसके ऊपर डिपेंड कर रहा है? Prospect of capital gain and loss on bonds, we can represent the risk on portfolio as. So sigma is representing the risk on. और रिस्क किस हवाले से है? About the prospects of returns. The returns are uncertain. So risk on the prospect of return equals beta. And you know that what is beta? Fraction of bonds held in wealth portfolio times. And this risk basically is function of what? ये रिस्क किस चीज के ऊपर आ रहा है? कैपिटल गेन और लॉस टर्म की वजह से. So that is why we have written that the risk we normally incur on the holding of bonds, which actually makes the return on bond uncertain. If you want to write a mathematical expression for that, it is nothing but beta times the risk which is mainly attributed to what? ये रिस्क किस वजह से है? जी की वजह से. कैपिटल गेन एंड लॉस टर्म. Getting?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
यानी बीटा जो है वो फ्रैक्शन है जितना आप बॉन्ड को होल्ड कर रहे हो अपने वेल्थ पोर्टफोलियो में, टाइम्स ये वो रिस्क फैक्टर हम लेबल कर रहे हैं कि दिस रिस्क फैक्टर इज मेनली एट्रीब्यूटेड टू द कैपिटल गेन और लॉस टर्म. सो द प्रोडक्ट ऑफ टू विल बी डिफाइनिंग how much risk you are incurring on the portfolio. So this is my expression 4. Got it? So
Yes,
expression
sir.
4 simply states that risk in getting the certain returns on portfolio is mainly according to the prospect of capital gain or loss on bonds, whose magnitude is defined by the fraction of bonds held in the portfolio beta. अब इस 4 को मैं थोड़ा सा रीअरेंज कर सकता हूं. If I want to isolate beta out of this 4, beta को यहीं पे रखूं, तो I'll be getting a ratio of these two things. ये वहां पे जाके डिवाइड हो जाएगा. Getting? ऐसे ही है. रीअरेंजमेंट हो सकती है ऐसे.
Yes, sir.
Beta on this side and this term which is multiplied with that has been brought to the other side. We'll get the value of beta in this way. Call it as 5. Once you get this beta, you can substitute this beta here. Can we?
Yes, sir, we can.
So 5 can be replaced into 3 we get. So we are now focusing on this particular equation by substituting value of beta. Expected return equals this substituted value of beta. Sorry, एक minute. This is the substituted value of beta, and this is the R which is multiplied. This is R was also there in the picture. So your expected return now is a product of this R times this ratio. R times this ratio. Now, now this equality basically counts where you should be there in the graph. ये इक्वालिटी डिफाइन करेगी कि आप ग्राफ में कहां हैं. अगर ये दोनों बराबर हों, if this is a main, if this equality holds, this implies what? Beta equals 1. यानी यहां पे अगर ये दोनों बराबर हो तो आई एम सेइंग बीटा इक्वल्स 1. In that sense, आप कहेंगे expected return should be equal to what? R.
R.
So we can evaluate the certain possibilities. If beta equals 1, which is equivalent to saying that this one, which I have already written in the previous slide, it is equivalent to saying that this equals this, we'll be holding all of our wealth. इस सूरत में आपका क्या डिसीजन होगा? We'll be holding all our of wealth portfolio in the form of bond. ये वो एक्सट्रीम पॉइंट है जिसपे हमारी सारी वेल्थ हम किस फॉर्म में रख रहे होंगे? बॉन्ड्स की फॉर्म में. इसका ये बीटा 1 का क्या मतलब है? बीटा 1 is indicating that we are keeping all our wealth in the form of beta representing fraction of bond in the wealth portfolio. और मैंने कहा था बीटा शुड लाई बिटवीन 0 एंड 1. अब ये मैं एक्सट्रीम केस डिस्कस कर रहा हूं कि इफ बीटा इज 1, which is equivalent to saying that this ratio is 1, and if we want to have its implication checked for expected return equation, it is equivalent to saying that expected returns equals return on bonds only. Will be holding all of wealth in the form of bonds. अब जो आपकी ग्राफ 3 थी, फिगर 3 कहां पे है? ये वाली. इस पे आप किस पॉइंट पे होंगे? ये आपका पॉइंट होगा. तो मैथमेटिकली इफ दैट पॉसिबिलिटी होल्ड्स, यू विल बी एट दिस पॉइंट. ये वो पॉइंट है JW जिसको मैंने शुरू में ही रूल आउट कर दिया था. So I'm just providing you a mathematical representation, and I'm just telling you that if mathematically you have certain possibilities taking place, then in which part of the graph you will be lying. So this will be that point where you will be lying, JW, where you'll be holding all your wealth. Look at this. Corresponding to this JW, you are bearing maximum risk, and you're holding all your wealth in the form of what? Bonds. No money holding. Exceptional case. What else? Alternatively, if beta is 0, if beta 0 हो जाए अगर आपके पास this term, तो 0 times R indicates that expected return will be 0. Expected return on bonds will be 0. ये एक्सट्रीम क्या बताती है? If you have no incentive of holding the bonds, then you should hold all money. Where should be the point in the graph you will be lying? Point O. Where is the point O? This one. You will be holding all money. So corresponding to these two extremes, in one extreme where beta is 1, this is the point where on the graph you should be lying. if beta is 0, this is the point on the graph you should be lying. And to explore the third possibility, which is more realistic one, if finally beta is less than 1. So this is that range which I already realistically explained, that beta lies between 0 and 1. Mathematically, this ratio should be suggesting that the numerator must be less than the denominator. So in that sense, this sigma r should be less than, ये बीटा नहीं है, सॉरी, इसको टाइपो है. I just omitted. Students, are you there with me?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
when beta is less than 1, means this particular term, which is reflecting the beta, if this is less than 1, this would suggest that this would be the case, that E of R should be less than that. We would lie on any of the line. ये वो risk aversion की possibility है जो हमने discuss की. If expected return on R is less than this R, means this particular term which was serving as a mark of reference there, in this case we would lie on any of the line. इस possibility को graph में अगर आपने depict करना है तो ये आप इस तरह interpret करेंगे इसे कि we would lie among any of these lines available. We can be lying at OA, we can be lying at OA prime, we can be lying at OA double prime. Means we can be in between anywhere, depending upon what? Depending upon the fraction of bonds held in the wealth portfolio. यानी आप इन तीनों लाइंस में से किसी भी लाइन पे लाई कर सकते हैं, depending upon the value of beta, fraction of bonds held in the wealth portfolio. Means if the fraction is higher, you will be lying. Where is that graph? Just a minute. You'll be lying corresponding to the steep line. If fraction is lower, you'll be lying corresponding to the flatter lines. Means if beta is higher, then you'll be at the steepish lines. If beta is lower, you'll be lying corresponding to the flatter lines. So this is how we have actually demonstrated the mathematical, or we have tried to coordinate what is there in terms of mathematical representation with our already presented graphical disposition. तो पोर्टफोलियो थ्योरी की जो मेन आइडिया या जिस था वो तो मैंने आपको ग्राफिकली एक्सप्लेन कर दिया था. दिस पोर्शन ऑफ डिस्कशन वाज एक्चुअली हाउ टू present or how to accord a mathematical representation to all that concepts we have already captured there. Clear hai?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Clear.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Now I'm I'm going to just remove this slide. I'm going to share the another slide with you where I have to present a summary of all that what we have discussed so far, and some empirical justifications or some points where we can make a discussion on empirical validity of these money demand theories we have discussed so far. That means I'm going to wrap up my discussion on money demand theories now. ये चैप्टर क्लोज करने जा रहे हैं हम मनी डिमांड थ्योरीज का. तो आई एम गोइंग टू समराइज ऑल दैट व्हाट वी हैव डिस्कस सो फार. तो अब मैं आपके सामने दूसरी स्क्रीन शेयर करूंगा एक. Screen is visible now?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Yes, sir.
So here in the bullets, I have just summarized all that what we have discussed so far. And you can see in these various bullets, I have actually started from where we started out with, means classical theory. And the first bullet is explaining you and telling you that what was the underlying theme of classical theory. The major role of money under classical theory was a medium of exchange role. When we entered into the domain of Canadian framework, we had a new introduction, a new component, that was the speculative component. And that means a switch from Canadian classical to Canadian mode actually added up one more component into the discussion, and that was the speculative component, where the emphasis made by Canadian was on the role of interest rate. That interest rate played a major role in defining the speculative demand for money. So Keynes' contribution was this one. When we entered into the domain of Friedman, he actually presented a relative frame of reference. Can you recall? The entire frame of reference and frame of discussion was changed from absolute comparisons to the relative comparisons. So Canadians emphasized the absolute role of interest rate, while when we moved on or switched to the Friedman's mode of discussion, that was a relative frame of reference where we compared the return on money with return on alternate assets, and then actually decides whether I can play a role in affecting the money demand or not. You could remember I actually explained you the rationalizing points why the return on money can be non-zero in the class. Can you recall that?
Yes, sir.
So he actually presented and demonstrated all his views that he treated return on money to be non-zero on many grounds based on whatsoever financial structure or changes in financial structure in the markets he observed there. I gave you an example of now and ATS accounts. Also, I presented a qualitative dimensions on once you hold some account in the bank, the privileges you will get by having some money saved, by time saved, or whatsoever the free payment modes, whatsoever you save in terms of by keeping money in the bank, that is actually equivalent to saying that you are having a return on money. Means opportunity cost concept जो मैंने explain किया था कि if you're not keeping money with you and keeping it somewhere else, and if you're not keeping money with you, keeping in the bank and in the form of most liquid asset, in that prospect, if it is giving you some privilege by the institution with whom you are keeping your money, that privilege in terms of time saving, free pay orders, free bank drafts, free e-payments, not free bill payments, for example, means not time saving cost there, where you are not in need to be in the queues of the banks to pay your bills. So once you save the time, you can always have a picture of what you save in terms of your wage, per hour wage. Because if you have to waste a lot of time in making or getting your bill paid while standing in the queues, then you can imagine that you have a opportunity cost of that. You have to take a leave from your bank, from your workplace. If you are a per wage worker, you have to compromise your per wage. And if by having an account in the bank, if bank is allowing you to make a online payment of the bill, this would suggest that a lot of time saving is there. So whatsoever you saved in terms of time, it is equivalent to saying that you have saved something in terms of wage compromised if you would be in need to be standing in the queue. So this is that these all that discussion where I said that return on money on many grounds can be non-zero. Physically, it can be non-zero. Actually, we are not able to, we are not capturing that, but qualitatively, all these dimensions, these intangibilities, intangible aspects are always there. When we moved on to the inventory theoretic approaches like Baumol-Tobin approach, these type of approaches basically claimed that the transaction component of money also is sensitive to the variations in interest rate. All those particular theories which we have highlighted there, like Canadian and Friedman's theory, they were focusing on this speculative component of money demand to be purely sensitive to variations in I. So they were only claiming that this component is sensitive to interest rates variation. But when we move on to see the theories like Baumol-Tobin theory, where my starting point was if money is serving as a medium of exchange, what are its benefits and what are its costs? So our starting point was we took as granted money as medium of exchange. So ultimately, we defined that function where money was supposed to be dependent upon fixed cost, dependent upon income of consumer, and dependent upon the interest rate as well. So we derived a money demand function later on in the specific discussion where we had this type of shape. But the point to be noticed is what type of money demand they were assuming. Was it a transactive component? Was it a speculative component? So keeping in mind my starting point, what was the starting point? If money is serving as medium of exchange, what are its benefit and cost? So normally they presented it to the world that we are talking about this transactive component. And ultimately they claimed that this transactive component is also a function of I. Students, are you there with me?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
So if you want to
Yes, sir.
broadly classify these two theories, Canadian and Friedman theory, with this approach of Baumol-Tobin, you can clearly make a point of difference between the two theories that if I treat Canadian and Friedman in one pool, that they both focus on speculative demand for money, although there was a difference. Canadian explicitly focused on the role of I, Friedman pacifized the role of I. It indirectly pacifized the role by producing or by incorporating the relative frame of reference. But they both are propagating the concept of speculative demand for money. Canadian says speculative component is a function of I. Friedman says speculative demand for money is a function of I. There is no point of divergence as far as the nature of this component is concerned. They both were presenting something about speculative component. But when it comes to approach like Baumol-Tobin approach, whose starting point was if money is serving a role or money is playing a role of medium of exchange, then what are its benefits and costs? In this Baumol-Tobin approach, the component which we merely focused on, which is sensitive to I, that was not the speculative component, that was the transactive component. Approaches like Tobin's portfolio optimization approach, which we have just covered, you must have noticed that what type of idea just only Tobin's portfolio optimization theory captured. This theory also focused on the speculative component of money demand.
And sir,
So
have you
ये जो
mentioned
तीन
one word, contextual
what
frame of reference?
contextual
Yes, contextual. Yes, sir.
contextual frame of reference.
Yes, sir. Can you explain it?
The context of discussion. What is context? When you say contextual frame
Means,
of
sir,
reference,
opportunity cost.
no. I'm broadly speaking about in what context you are making some discussion. This is what is called as contextual frame of reference. You need to have a background in your mind while making a discussion. This is what is termed as contextual frame of reference. So what I'm telling in here, the first one is giving you ideas about speculative component, means Canadian. Friedman is also focused on this approach of speculative component, means it is also signifying the speculative component in the hindsight. The third one, a third approach, which is Tobin's portfolio optimization approach, this is also focusing on this speculative component. But it is presenting an outlook where speculative component of money demand is basically extracted out of the trade-off relation between risk and return, trade-off relation between money as an asset and bond as an asset. And having this trade-off relationship in the mind, You should be in search of the optimal combinations and of both the assets or coexisting assets, a return free asset, which is money, and the return yielding asset, which is bond or something else. So you should be in search of the optimal combination of that. The prospects of uncertainties are always involved in defining this speculative demand for money component is concerned. So speculative demand for money is always there in the theory, in the three theories, Canadian, Friedman, and Tobin portfolio optimization theory. But the way in which these theories approaches this component and functionalizes it, how it defines the functionalization of that, that is a point of debate. Keynes functionalized this speculative component in different way. Friedman functionalized this speculative component in different way, and Tobin's portfolio optimization functionalized this in different way. तो फंक्शनल फॉर्म जो है इस कंपोनेंट की वो वेरी करती है, लेकिन इस चीज पे तीनों स्कूल ऑफ थॉट्स का बिलीव है कि दिस स्पेकुलेटिव कंपोनेंट exists and it is ultimately be sensitive to variations of I. कितना सेंसिटिव है आई से, ये इन तीनों अप्रोचेस में पॉइंट ऑफ डिबेट है. In Canadian approach, highly sensitive to I. In Friedman approach, relatively less sensitive to I. In Tobin's portfolio approach, it is also very much sensitive to I because I has relevance to change your optimal combinations. So in Canadian, in Tobin's portfolio optimization approach, the speculative component also becomes highly sensitive to I, but through the understanding of this idea that these variations in I are actually changing the optimal combinations, which normally defines what an individual holds in terms of bond holdings and money holdings in their wealth portfolio. So passive role of I is normally propagated by Friedman, and the active role of I is visibly available in theories of Keynes and this Tobin portfolio theory. बोमेल टोबिन को मैं इसलिए रूल आउट कर रहा हूं पिक्चर से या डिस्कशन से कि इट इज मेनली फोकस्ड ऑन द ट्रांजैक्टिव कंपोनेंट, नॉट ऑन द स्पेकुलेटिव कंपोनेंट. So this overview of the or highlights of these theory is clear?
Yes, sir, it's clear.
Yes, sir.
Now come to this question of the validity. And I'm talking about the empirical validity. Means if you come to empirics and if you want to observe something in real life, whether something is valid or not, it is dependent, highly sensitive to various things. अभी तक जितनी डिस्कशन हमने की है, we have actually defined money into two components, transaction component और speculative component. Transaction को लिटरेचर में कहा जाता है एक्टिव बैलेंसेस एंड स्पेकुलेटिव कंपोनेंट को कहा जाता है पैसिव बैलेंसेस. मींस ट्रांजैक्शन कंपोनेंट रिप्रेजेंट्स द एक्टिव बैलेंसेस. There is no way in which anyone among us or any economist can deny you need money for making transactions. कोई भी हम में से ये डिनाई नहीं कर सकता कि मनी जो है वो ट्रांजैक्शंस को मेक करने के लिए हमें चाहिए. तो ऑन दिस ग्राउंड्स अगर आप मनी बैलेंसेस को कैटेगराइज करें टू ब्रॉड डायमेंशंस में, सो ट्रांजैक्शन कंपोनेंट बेसिकली डिफाइंस द एक्टिव मनी बैलेंस कंपोनेंट, और स्पेकुलेटिव जो है वो पॉइंट ऑफ डिबेट है ऑन मैनी ग्राउंड्स. तो ये जो बैलेंसेस का पार्ट है इसको आप लिटरेचर में पैसिव बैलेंसेस कहते हो. यानी इसमें आपके बारे में इसके बारे में मुख्तलिफ राय हो सकती है. यू कैन हैव मेनी ओपिनियंस रिगार्डिंग दैट. So when I say active balances, which is pertinent to transaction component, this is not much debatable in literature. इकोनॉमिस्ट की इसके बारे में ज्यादा डिबेट आपको नजर नहीं आती. जो आपके पास empirical validity है, that has to be focused upon regarding which component? Speculative. And this requires some important considerations. इसके बारे में या इसकी इंपेरिकल वैलिडिटी के बारे में, इट्स इंपेरिकल रेलेवेंस के बारे में अगर आपने जानना है, या इफ यू वांट टू मेक सम डिस्कशन ऑन द इंपेरिकल वैलिडिटी ऑफ दिस स्पेक्युलेटिव कंपोनेंट, ट्रांजैक्शन को मैं रूल आउट कर रहा हूं इसलिए कि उसकी इंपेरिकल वैलिडिटी पे कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है. Everybody is agreed that even in the real life, in the real world, that is an established fact that we need money for making transactions. When it comes to speculative component, there are many subjective state of affairs which can put the theoretical propositions to question mark. The empirical validity of the speculative component can be put to question mark on the basis of many real life facts. So that is why I'm going to make some discussion on the empirical validity of speculative component. Theoretically, whatsoever is proposed, you should judge it whether empirically it is valid or not. In the real life, it can hold or there is no margin for that thing to hold. Students, are you getting this? What I'm saying in here?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So if we want to test the empirical validity of speculative demand for money, अब मैं अगर आप लोगों को कहूं कि इसको empirically टेस्ट करें, तो सबसे पहले आप लोगों को क्या करना पड़ेगा? You need to go to data. You need to go to data. यानी अगर आपको कहा जाए, अगर आप लोगों को मैं ये एक्सरसाइज दूं कि चेक हाउ मनी डिमांड इज डिपेंडेंट अपॉन आई, अगर मैं आपसे कहूं एक्सप्लोर दिस रिलेशनशिप, तो आपको किसकी तरफ जाना पड़ेगा? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल यू हैव टू गो टुवर्ड्स व्हाट फॉर दिस इंपेरिकल टेस्टिंग. इस इंपेरिकल टेस्टिंग के लिए सबसे पहले आपको जाना पड़ेगा डाटा ऑन आई की तरफ, और दूसरी आपको जाना पड़ेगा डाटा ऑन एम की तरफ. डाटा ऑफ एम मनी, इज इट?
Yes, sir.
इंपेरिकल टेस्ट करने अगर आपने उसके ऊपर कोई इकोनोमेट्रिक मॉडल लगाना है, कोई रिग्रेशन रन करनी है, तो ये डाटा तो चाहिए होगा आपको उस इंपेरिकल मॉडल सेटिंग के लिए, नहीं?
Yes, sir.
अब वो जो रिजल्ट्स होते हैं ना उस इंपेरिकल टेस्टिंग के, the results of that empirical testing highly depends upon how you define something and how you take the data of that thing. And if you could remember, we had certain definitions of money. We have certain measures of money defined, M1 and M2. क्या डिफरेंस है दोनों में? What was the difference between the two? Please let me know that.
Sir,
M1,
M1 shows the
M1
more
is
liquid
higher
one.
liquid, sir.
आप जब M1 को राइट डाउन करते थे तो यू जस्ट राइट C प्लस से D. ये किसी का माइक ऑन है, आवाज बाउंस बैक हो रही है, प्लीज स्विच इट ऑफ. दैट इज C प्लस D. Most liquid assets, currency plus demand deposits, is it? Of course, we have some other complementary parts of that. I'm not highlighting there, but mainly this one. Is it?
yes, sir.
लेकिन जब आप M2 को डिफाइन करते थे तो you have M1 plus certain less liquid assets or components there, saving deposits, mutual funds, money market deposit accounts, and things like that. So when it comes to empirical validation of something, then it is very important. ये मैं आपको as a student थोड़ी सी गाइड भी प्रोवाइड कर रहा हूँ. अक्सर स्टूडेंट्स इन बातों का लिहाज नहीं रखते. यानी मैंने आपको एक चीज पढ़ा दी है. I have actually taught something to you people that money demand is a function of I. और अब मैं आपको कह देता हूं कि check it empirically whether it is sensitive to I or not. आप एक assumption impose करते हो कि let's suppose I'm assuming that money market is in equilibrium, so money demand is equal to money supply. उस assumption के बाद अब आपके पास next task है कि अब मैं इसके ऊपर data कैसे लूं, how to take data on that. So data on M, then this becomes a question that whether to take data on M1 and whether to take data on M2. Now, as a novice, as a starter, as a learner, if you could take a data on M1 and try to run a regression of M1 upon I, अगर आप M1 का डाटा ले लेते हैं और उसकी रिग्रेशन आप रन कर देते हैं इसके ऊपर, फॉर एग्जाम्पल विद दैट, and you get to a conclusion that this beta coefficient is very low. इसको मैं यहीं पे मर्ज कर देता हूं, यहां पे I सेपरेट लिख रहा हूं. And you get to a conclusion that this beta coefficient is very low. तो आप क्या कंक्लूड करेंगे? There is no role of I in affecting this money demand. ऐसा ही है ना?
जी सर.
अगर मैं कह रहा हूं कि बीटा जो है वो बड़ा लो आ जाए, तो आप जब उसे इंटरप्रेट करेंगे तो आप यही कहेंगे ना, any change in I is not affecting this money demand significantly. Is it like that?
Yes, sir.
लेकिन उसमें आप एक चीज को इग्नोर कर रहे होगे उस इंपेरिकल वैलिडेशन में कि you are mistakenly using M1 and the components of M1 are C plus D, which is currency plus current account deposits, and they are not much sensitive to variation in I. लेकिन अगर आप टेक्निकली साउंड होते, if you would be technically sound, तो आपको ये आइडिया होता कि rather than taking M1 measure of money, I should be using that measure of money in which I will have those components which are sensitive to variations in interest rate. अब आप मुझे बताएं कि M1 के कंपोनेंट आपको ज्यादा सेंसिटिव नजर आते हैं या M2 के कंपोनेंट आपको ज्यादा सेंसिटिव नजर आते हैं I की वेरिएशन से?
M1 के सर.
खुदा का नाम लो यार.
सर M2 सर.
M2 करेंसी तो सेंसिटिव नहीं है आय के चेंज होने से. आपकी जो करेंसी की प्रेफरेंसेस होती हैं, दे आर नॉट सेंसिटिव टू दैट. करंट अकाउंट जब आप बैंक में खुलवाते हो तो क्या इंटरेस्ट रेट को देख के खुलवाते हो?
नो सर.
आपको करंट अकाउंट पे तो कुछ मिलता ही नहीं है. डी किसको रिप्रेजेंट कर रहा है? डी इज रिप्रेजेंटिंग व्हाट? करंट अकाउंट. सो वंस यू ओपन अप करंट अकाउंट इन द बैंक, यू टोटली इग्नोर व्हाट इज आय. आपकी तो इंटरेस्ट रेट प्रेफरेंस में ही नहीं आता.
Yes, sir.
स्टूडेंट्स गेटिंग माय पॉइंट?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
तो अगर आपको एक इंपेरिकल डाटा टेस्टिंग करने को कहा जाए तो उसमें ये चीज बड़ी मैटर करती है फिर कि वेदर यू आर टेकिंग डाटा ऑन M1 और वेदर यू आर टेकिंग डाटा ऑन M2, एंड वंस यू रिग्रेस M1 अपॉन I you will get different results, and once you regress M2 upon I you will get different results. So as a learner, as a researcher, you should be very careful that while making or while trying to empirically validate the results, you should be very careful about what definition of money you are using. If you are using M1 definition, which is more suited to transaction, M1 की नेचर को अगर आप देखें तो ये ज्यादा कंपैटिबल है ट्रांजैक्टिव कंपोनेंट के साथ. You normally use currency and demand deposits, and you are utilizing these components for making transactions. So you are using both these components. This definition of measure of money is more suitable to transactive component. तो अगर इसकी रिग्रेशन रन होनी चाहिए तो वो y के साथ रन होनी चाहिए, वो I के साथ रन नहीं होनी चाहिए. Getting my point? ये इनकम से सेंसिटिव है.
Yes, sir.
और अगर आपको ये मॉडल सेट करना है कि मनी डिमांड की टेस्टिंग मैंने करनी है इंटरेस्ट रेट के साथ, तो आपको M2 को यूटिलाइज करना चाहिए क्यों? बिकॉज M2 इज कैरिंग दोज कंपोनेंट्स इन विच वी हैव सेविंग डिपॉजिट्स, इन विच मनी मार्केट म्यूचुअल फंड्स आर देयर, मनी मार्केट डिपॉजिट अकाउंट्स आर देयर, लार्ज डिनोमिनेशन टाइम डिपॉजिट्स आर देयर, स्मॉल डिनोमिनेशन टाइम डिपॉजिट्स. तो इंटरेस्ट यील्डिंग एसेट्स तो M2 में पड़े हुए हैं. तो इंटरेस्ट रेट से सेंसिटिव M2 को होना है, ना कि M1 को. गेटिंग माय पॉइंट?
Yes, sir.
तो इंपेरिकल वैलिडिटी या इंपेरिकल टेस्टिंग में इस बात का ख्याल रखना बड़ा जरूरी होता है कि बिफोर मेकिंग अ फाइनल कंक्लूजन you should be carefully selecting the data on a given series. If you wrongly choose M1 and try to regress its or make it regression upon I and conclude that I has no meaning for affecting money demand, this empirical result is wrong. Why it is wrong? Because you are choosing a wrong specification. You should only regress M1 upon Y, because Y, which is income, is affecting C, which is currency, and your preference regarding demand deposits. I is not affecting the preference of C and preference of D. So you should be properly specifying the model for your empirical validity testing, for your empirical validation. ये point clear हो गया?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. थोड़ा थोड़ा.
थोड़ा थोड़ा? Who is saying थोड़ा?
Yes, sir. Clear है sir. Yes.
तकरीबन पूरा सर.
क्लियर है सर.
इकोनॉमेटिक्स सब लोगों ने पढ़ी हुई है. जो आप इकोनॉमेटिकली टेस्टिंग करते हैं किसी भी मॉडल की, किसी भी इकोनॉमिक मॉडल या रिग्रेशन को रन करते हैं, वो क्या कर रहे होते हो आप? यू आर बेसिकली इंपेरिकली टेस्टिंग समथिंग. तो मैंने आपको उसके बारे में एक फॉर्मल गाइड प्रोवाइड की है कि यू शुड बी वेरी केयरफुल अबाउट व्हाट इज प्रेजेंटेड बाय द थ्योरी एंड व्हाट यू आर टेस्टिंग. थ्योरी प्रेजेंट कर रही है आई मैटर्स फॉर एमडी. Theory is presenting that I matters for MD and you are trying to test it. As a student, you are testing it and you have chosen a data on M1 and you have regressed a regression of that M1 upon I and concluded that I does not matters for money demand because I have found a coefficient beta very low. Here you have wrongly interpreted the result and you are badly mistaken on that account. You are not carefully taking into consideration that what is the definition of money. M1 and its components and M2 and its components. You should be carefully regressing. You should not regress M1 upon that I. You should have regressed M2 upon I, because M2's components are sensitive to I, and then you should have concluded that I matters for MD or not. If you are regressing M1 upon I and then propagating it to the world that I does not count for M, then your results are not valid. So empirical testing needs this distinction and clarification, and these things or points should be considered before empirically testing anything. Clear hai?
Yes, sir.
Yes, clear.
Clear, sir.
Yes, sir.
ये टाइपो एक मिस्टेक है, ये रिपीट हो गया वही पॉइंट पहला वाला, सो ओमिट इट. ये वही पॉइंट है. जस्ट कम टू पॉइंट नंबर 2. Just read it out thoroughly. Whether we are in the Canadian framework or whether we are in the portfolio optimization framework, they heavily rely on the role of interest rate in explaining the money demand variations. ये बात मैं पहले ही कर चुका हूं. I have already explained this point in my broad discussion and summarizing note. The interest rate is normally assumed to be an opportunity cost of holding money or return you get by holding an alternative in your wealth portfolio, say bonds. In empirical relevance, the structure of financial markets and the variants of financial or money market instruments would define how valid these alternatives would be. इनकी जो validity है वो आपकी financial और money market के ऊपर depend करती है. आप कह रहे हो कि these theories where you speculate that speculative demand for money is sensitive to I. And when I say what is this I broadly define you that this I represents what? Return on any alternative of money. Is it? Starting point मैंने यही लिया था ना?
Yes, sir.
Return on any alternative of money. Now depends upon कि आप कह रहे हो कि alternative of money. अगर मैं कहूं कि alternative है ही नहीं आपके पास ज्यादा, तो do you think the theory is valid? If you are living in that country, where you are not finding much alternatives of money, or the financial markets in your country are not established enough where you can have confidence in making your money invested in them. So do you think this theory is valid?
No, sir.
So I'm raising that point in here. If you are living in that country where you're not finding much alternatives of money, if alternatives of money are not available at your disposal, you are not aware. You can see countries like Pakistan, we are not having such financial market established or sound financial market established as compared to Western countries. अगर यहाँ पे मैं आपके सामने किसी मनी मार्केट इंस्ट्रूमेंट का नाम लूंगा तो आप लोग मुझे हैरत से देखेंगे, because there is not much propagation in the media and you're not finding much advertising or advertisement of those financial or money market instruments which can make people familiar with that. ना तो इतनी established financial markets हैं और ना ही इतने ज्यादा financial market alternatives या instruments available हैं money के आपको, which can make you convinced that you should not keep your money with you, rather you should keep your money in the form of those instruments or assets. तो अगर आप एक ऐसे मुल्क में रहते हैं where you're not having a sound or financial market established and there's not much propagation, people are not having much confidence on those markets or those alternatives of money available, so these money demand theories which propagates that this money demand is sensitive to I, they may not be valid. ये उनकी वैलिडिटी पे क्वेश्चन मार्क पुट हो जाएगा उन कंट्रीज के लिए. दिस पॉइंट क्लियर?
Yes, sir.
सर फिर ऐसे, एक्सक्यूज मी सर,
जी जी.
तो फिर सर ऐसे कंट्रीज में जो डिमांड फॉर मनी होगी वो हाई होगी,
वो
नहीं
डिमांड फॉर
उसको
मनी
लोग
नहीं, वो डिमांड फॉर मनी आय से सेंसिटिव नहीं होगी.
यस सर,
ये मैंने यहाँ पे आखिर में इसको समराइज किया है.
ठीक
द
है
रोल
सर,
ऑफ आय विल बी पैसिवाइज. आप कहोगे कि मनी डिमांड डिपेंड करती है लेकिन ऑन दोज फैक्टर्स अदर देन आय. अगर उन कंट्रीज के लिए फिर आप जब बात करोगे तो आप कहोगे अदर देन आय. तो
ओके
ये जो
सर,
आपने स्पेकुलेटिव डिमांड फॉर मनी की थ्योरीज प्रेजेंट की हैं, दे विल नॉट बी वैलिड फॉर दिस टाइप ऑफ कंट्रीज.
यस सर,
स्टूडेंट्स
गॉट
क्लियर
इट
है?
सर,
फाइन.
Yes, sir. Cleared, sir.
वन मोर पॉइंट विच इज पॉइंट नंबर 3, वैलिडिटी के हवाले से. इंडिविजुअल्स does not always speculate in terms of financial market instrument. This is a very important point to be addressed. आपने जितनी भी मनी डिमांड की थ्योरीज प्रेजेंट की हैं, इसमें आप ये अज्यूम कर रहे हो कि while making decisions about speculative demand for money, individuals make a guess in terms of financial market instruments like bonds or stocks. Don't you think that individuals sometimes make speculation or guesses in terms of some other assets like gold, silver, and some real assets or physical assets? Speculation सिर्फ financial market instruments, bonds और stocks के लिहाज से तो नहीं हो सकती. Speculation can be, or your guesses can be in terms of these type of different other assets as well, having some intrinsic value. Getting my point?
Yes,
So,
sir.
if
Yes, sir.
individual evaluates or start making relative comparisons, आपका जो सारा डिस्कशन था वो relative comparison के ऊपर था ना, speculate करते हुए. So if individual starts making relative comparisons, not with these bonds, stocks, or equities or any other thing, but they start making
so
relative comparisons with these
from
assets.
micro level पे नहीं दे सकते सर, मैक्रो लेवल पे दे सकते हैं सर.
If individual starts making relative comparisons with these assets, which I have mentioned in front of you, rather than those typical financial market instruments, तो ये एसेट्स जो हैं ये तो आपको इंटरेस्ट रेट नहीं पे करते, गोल्ड, सिल्वर, रियल एसेट्स, बट यू आर defining what is money demand by keeping these assets in your mind, gold, silver, and real assets. Do you think that I will count for affecting money demand here?
No, sir.
No, sir.
So in this discussion, what I have said, again, the role of I is passivized. So speculation is not always in terms of these financial market assets, but they can be on the basis of some other assets. You always make relative comparison with these type of assets like gold, silver, and then decide how much money to keep with you and how much gold to keep with you. How much money to keep with you, how much silver to keep with you. How much money to keep with you, how much of a building or plots to keep with you, and things like that. तो उस सूरत में फिर क्या होगा? Again, in this scenario, the role of interest rate again will be passivized. तो आपकी वो theories valid नहीं रहेंगी. ये मैं आय का रोल कब कब वैलिड होता है या पैसिवाइज होता है, मैं उसको डिफाइन करके आपको बता रहा हूं. गॉट इट?
Yes, sir.
One more aspect, last one, to check the validity or empirical validity of that.
Sir, in the case, the word passivized means the interest rate comes under the debate or argument of someone.
Interest rate does not count. Interest rate would not matter for explaining your money demand preferences. Passivized जहां भी यूज कर रहा हूं वहां पे मैं ये कह रहा हूं कि interest rate would not count in affecting the money demand preferences.
Okay, sir.
Now come to this point, like last one, community structure पे जरा आ जाएं. In communities like we live in Pakistan, there might be so many Afghani students sitting in here, some Indonesian students sitting in here, and they should be very well familiar with the community structure in their own respective countries there. The influx of financial investment in capital and money market is quite limited. मैं पाकिस्तान के हवाले से सिर्फ बात कर रहा हूँ. लोग फाइनेंशियल मार्केट में इन्वेस्टमेंट्स जो हैं वो बड़ी लिमिटेड स्केल पे करते हैं. आप लोगों में से कितने लोगों के फादर ऐसे हैं जिन्होंने स्टॉक मार्केट्स में या बॉन्ड मार्केट्स में इन्वेस्टमेंट की हुई है? How many of you are among those who have seen their fathers investing their money in the bonds and capital markets or stock markets there?
I think there is no one, sir.
No one. तो इसी बेसिस पे मैं कह रहा हूँ, if you keep on searching, if you keep on evaluating the various families or communities there in countries like Pakistan, in Afghanistan, you might find this particular thing that the financial investment prospects are very limited there. अगर आप इन्हें यूएस की इकोनॉमी से या यूके की इकोनॉमी से कंपेयर करें या इवन नेबरिंग एशियन कंट्रीज के साथ भी कंपेयर करें, I have actually searched it out. Countries like India and China, ये prospects बड़े high हैं. They heavily invest in such type of markets. अब अगर हम इसमें थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस फाइंड आउट करने की कोशिश करें तो इसमें ज्यादातर रीजन जो है वो कन्वेंशनल रूट्स पे जाती है. स्पेशली जो हमारी कन्वेंशनल रूट्स में रिलीजन है ना, दैट इज बेसिकली अ मेजर पॉइंट ऑफ डिफरेंस. प्रोहिबिशन ऑफ रिबा. Even you can see around you, there are many moderate families and people who are even not offering prayers and involved in such religious rituals to the strict extent. आपने उनको भी ये कहते हुए सुना होगा. You would be finding them, you would have listened to them by saying that they would be saying that we should not be saving our money in the banks, we should not be keeping our money in the form of stocks, we should not be getting ourselves insured and things like that. Even moderate frame of reference जो आपको बाज़ाहिर में apparently moderate नजर आते हैं लोग, वो भी इस चीज को avoid करते हैं. Do you agree with this statement?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So if this type of religious or these type of roots are there within a community structure or a country, within a country's domain, then the financial markets won't get much margin to be operative or to be fully functional as compared to the rest of the world. So in that sense, आप जब इस किस्म की conventional roots पे जाते हैं जहां पे आपके religious roots भी आ जाती हैं, तो these type of money demand functions will not be valid empirically. You may not find any empirical validation of these type of theories over here. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
अगला चैप्टर स्टार्ट करें या इनफ है?
It is enough
Sir,
for
enough,
today, sir.
sir, enough. आज के लिए.
It's enough for today.
Yes, sir.
So, any
Yes, sir.
you want to ask? I just want to end up the lecture. मैं ये स्लाइड्स आप लोगों के साथ शेयर कर दूंगा इंशाल्लाह आपके Google और रेफरेंस तो आपको पता ही है, हमने ये चैप्टर कवर किया है.
सर ये रिकॉर्ड भी अपलोड करें.
इतना मेहनत के साथ लाइव लेक्चर दिया है तो रिकॉर्डिंग पे क्यों रिलाई करेंगे आप लोग? अगर रिकॉर्डिंग ना भी अवेलेबल हो तो व्हाट्स द प्रॉब्लम? यू शुड बी अवेलेबल लाइव ऑन दिस.
Yes, sir.
लेकिन होपफुली रिकॉर्डिंग जिसकी अवेलेबल होगी मेरे पास, क्योंकि अक्सर ऐसा होता है कि इस गूगल क्लासरूम के प्लेटफॉर्म में एक थोड़ा सा बग है, वो ये कि रिकॉर्डिंग कभी कभी आपके ईमेल पे वो नहीं सेंड हो पाती. कभी खास तौर पे जब आपका इलेक्ट्रिसिटी या लोड शेडिंग का इशू आता है, एनर्जी फेलियर, तो उसमें जब इंटरप्ट हो जाते हैं ना आप कनेक्शन से, तो तब आपको वो मीटिंग नहीं मिल पाती रिकॉर्डिंग. तो फिर उस सूरत में बंदा शेयर नहीं करता.
Yes, sir.